Oh, God, this is terrible. Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, or Sir Keir Starmer, is about to head off on his 40th trip in 16 months. Air Miles Keir. He's off to attend COP30, which is in Brazil. They've had to dig half the rainforest down to create a runway and roads so they can get in there. We're delighted to say a very good morning. Is it Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation? You see, that's a proper job, and I'm just sat here. Good morning, Harry. How are you?
Good morning.
Starmer's climate gamble, defying his own advisors. Before we dive into what might be the most telling decision of Keir Starmer's premiership so far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stay plugged into British News Blog because what I'm about to unpack reveals far more about the state of British politics than you might think. So here's the situation. After weeks of dithering, deliberating, and what Downing Street would probably call careful consideration, Sir Keir Starmer has finally confirmed he'll be attending the UN COP30 climate summit in Brazil this November. Now, on the surface, this might seem like a rather straightforward decision for a Labour Prime Minister. Climate change, green jobs, international leadership, all very on brand, wouldn't you say? But here's where it gets absolutely fascinating, and frankly, rather revealing about the tensions bubbling away inside Number 10. Nearly everyone in Downing Street wanted him to stay home. Yes, you heard that correctly. The Financial Times reported last month that there was a big fight inside government over this very issue, with the vast majority of his own advisors telling the Prime Minister to give Brazil a miss and focus on the domestic agenda ahead of the autumn budget. Picture the scene. The PM's closest aides, the political strategists, the special advisors all huddled around saying, "Don't go, don't go, don't go," and Starmer essentially responding with, "Thanks for your input. I'm going anyway." That's not just confidence. That's conviction, or perhaps something else entirely. We'll get to that. The timing here is absolutely critical. We're talking about early November, May days before Rachel Reeves stands up in Parliament to deliver what could be the most consequential budget in a generation. The government is still reeling from various controversies. Public approval ratings aren't exactly soaring. And here's the Prime Minister deciding to hop on a plane to the Amazonian port city of Belém when conventional political wisdom screams that he should be in Westminster, on the ground, controlling the narrative. One person familiar with the discussions told reporters that the argument inside Downing Street was straightforward. In the run-up to the budget, the focus should be squarely on delivery for a domestic audience. They pointed out that Starmer already has a packed international schedule with trips to India and the G20 summit in South Africa on the horizon. So why add another jaunt across the Atlantic? But here's what makes this decision so intriguing. And if you're not subscribed yet, you really should be, because we're going to be dissecting these power plays all year long. Starmer ignored his advisors precisely because this isn't just about climate change. This is about drawing battle lines, about political identity, and quite possibly about legacy building far earlier in his premiership than we might have expected. The announcement from Downing Street was laden with the kind of language that tells you everything you need to know about how Labour wants to frame this issue. Net zero is the economic opportunity of the 21st century, they declared, one that has the potential to reignite our industrial heartlands. Notice the framing there. This isn't tree-hugging environmentalism. This is economic nationalism wrapped in a green bow. It's about jobs, industry, growth, and positioning Britain as a global leader while others, shall we say, retreat from the stage. And that brings us to the delicious political theater of it all, because Starmer would have looked like an absolute hypocrite if he'd bottled this decision. Cast your mind back to 2022 when Rishi Sunak, in his infinite wisdom, decided to skip COP27 in Egypt. Starmer, then leader of the opposition, absolutely tore into him, calling Sunak's absence a failure of leadership. Those words are now hanging over this decision like the sword of Damocles. Can you imagine the field day the opposition would have had if Starmer, having made such a meal of Sunak's absence, had then pulled the same stunt himself? The attack lines write themselves. Labour MPs would have been squirming on the green benches trying to defend the indefensible. So yes, there's an element of political necessity here, but that doesn't fully explain why he went against the overwhelming advice from his own team. Here's where the conservative comparison becomes utterly stark. And this is what Downing Street is really banking on. Under Kimi Badenoch, the Tories have lurched into full-blown climate skepticism territory. And I'm not using that term lightly. Badenoch has vowed to repeal the Climate Change Act and scrap the target of reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Let that sink in for a moment. A target that was introduced in 2019 under Theresa May, a conservative prime minister, is now being thrown on the bonfire by her own party. The legislation that passed with cross-party support, that represented a rare moment of political consensus on an existential threat, is now apparently fair game. Badenoch is betting that the British public has grown tired of green levies, heat pump mandates, and what she would characterize as the cost of the net zero transition. She's gambling that there are more votes in skepticism than in ambition. And this is where Starmer's calculation gets really interesting. One ally of the Prime Minister let slip something rather telling to journalists. They argued that Labour was in danger of losing more votes to the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats than to Reform UK or the Conservatives on this issue. Read that again because it's absolutely crucial to understanding Starmer's political positioning. The threat isn't from the right on climate, it's from the left and the centre-left. Climate change still motivates the Labour voter base, this ally said, even if that support is fraying at the edges. Fraying at the edges. What a phrase. It suggests that Labour's coalition is more fragile than the party would like to admit, that there are progressive voters out there who are deeply unimpressed with some of the compromises and caution that have defined the early months of this government. By going to COP30, by making this a personal priority, Starmer is sending a signal to those voters. I hear you. I'm with you. Don't stray. Now, if you're enjoying this analysis and you want more of this level of detail, hit that subscribe button because British News Blog is your go-to source for cutting through the spin and getting to what actually matters in British politics. The international dimension of this cannot be ignored either. Donald Trump has just pulled the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement for the second time. Yes, you read that correctly, the second time. It's like watching someone learn absolutely nothing from recent history. With America retreating from global climate leadership, there's a vacuum, and vacuums in international politics don't stay empty for long. Starmer clearly sees an opportunity for Britain to position itself as a leader on the world stage, to be the sensible, reliable partner that others can work with while the Americans go through whatever this phase is. Michael Jacobs, a former climate advisor to Gordon Brown, called the decision excellent news and noted that given the UK's strong record both at home and internationally, Starmer has the chance to play a critical role at this summit. That's not just diplomatic nicety. That's a recognition that Britain, for all its post-Brexit soul-searching, still has convening power on certain issues. Climate is one of them. Luke Murphy, a Labour MP and chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Climate Change, was even more bullish, saying Starmer was leading from the front and putting the UK back where it belongs, at the forefront of climate leadership. Now, you might dismiss that as the kind of loyalist cheerleading you'd expect from a backbench MP, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong, but there's substance beneath the spin. Britain does have a decent track record on emissions reductions. We've cut our carbon emissions faster than most major economies. We've grown our renewable energy sector significantly. We hosted COP26 in Glasgow, which, for all its flaws and unmet promises, did move the dial on certain commitments. So when Labour MPs talk about climate leadership, they're not pulling it entirely out of thin air. But let's inject a dose of reality here, shall we? Because for all the soaring rhetoric about economic opportunity and industrial heartlands, the British public remains deeply ambivalent about the costs and disruptions of the net zero transition. Poll after poll shows that while people support climate action in principle, that support becomes rather more conditional when it involves changes to their own lives, higher costs, or restrictions on behavior. The backlash against clean air zones, the uproar over heat pump mandates, the fury over petrol car phase-outs, these are not figments of Tory imagination. They represent genuine political challenges that Labour will have to navigate, and going to a climate summit in Brazil doesn't make those domestic headaches disappear. If anything, it might sharpen them if voters perceive a disconnect between international glad-handing and domestic delivery. And there's the budget elephant in the room. Rachel Reeves is about to deliver a fiscal statement that will set the tone for this entire parliament. She's expected to make difficult decisions about spending, taxation, and borrowing. If those decisions are perceived as painful, and they almost certainly will be by someone, then Starmer's absence from the country at such a critical moment could become a political liability. The opposition will paint him as more interested in globe-trotting than governing, more focused on his international image than the lives of ordinary Britons struggling with the cost of living. It's predictable attack politics, but predictable doesn't mean ineffective. The Prime Minister is banking on the view that attending COP30 will be seen as an act of leadership, not an act of avoidance, but that's a calculation that could go either way depending on how the budget lands and what else happens in the news cycle. What's particularly fascinating about this whole episode is what it reveals about Starmer's decision-making style. Here's a man who has built his political career on caution, on carefully triangulating positions, on not getting too far ahead of public opinion. Yet on this issue, he's ignored the overwhelming consensus of his own advisors and made a decision based, it seems, on personal conviction. One source noted that Starmer has a record of ignoring such advice if he genuinely believes in an issue. That's a revealing glimpse behind the curtain. It suggests that for all the talk of Starmer being overly managed, overly cautious, there are certain issues where he'll dig in his heels and damn the consequences. Climate appears to be one of them. Whether that's because he genuinely believes in the urgency of the issue, or because he thinks the political upside outweighs the risks, or some combination of both, is harder to determine. But the fact that he's willing to buck his own team on this tells you it matters to him. Energy Secretary Ed Miliband will be attending the main COP30 summit, which runs from November 10th to 21st. Miliband, of course, is a true believer on climate, someone who has been banging this drum for years, often to the detriment of his own political fortunes. His presence at the longest summit while Starmer attends the leaders' segment is a signal about how seriously Labour is taking this. They're not just showing up for the photo opportunity. They're engaging with the substance, the negotiations, the nitty-gritty of international climate diplomacy. Or at least, that's what they want us to believe. So where does this leave us? Starmer has made his choice. He's going to Brazil, he's defying his advisors, and is drawing a stark contrast with Badenoch's conservatives. It's a bet that climate action is still a political asset for Labour, that international leadership still matters to voters, and that the economic opportunities of the green transition can be sold to a skeptical public. It's also a bet that he can be in Brazil without the budget falling apart back home, without losing control of the domestic narrative, and without looking like he's fiddling while Rome burns, or perhaps more appropriately, while Britain shivers through an energy crisis. The next few weeks will tell us whether this gamble pays off. If the budget is well received, if Labour can articulate a compelling vision of green growth that resonates beyond the metropolitan activist base, then Starmer's decision to attend COP30 might be remembered as a moment of leadership. But if things go sideways, if the budget bombs, if some domestic crisis erupts while he's glad-handing in Belém, then this decision could become a millstone. That's the nature of political risk-taking, and whatever else you might say about this choice, it is a risk. What's clear is that climate change is back as a major dividing line in British politics. For a few years there, it seemed like we'd achieved something close to consensus, that all the major parties broadly agreed on the need for action, even if they disagreed on the pace and methods. Badenoch has blown that consensus apart, and Starmer is responding by leaning in rather than triangulating. It's a bold move, perhaps even a necessary one for Labour's electoral coalition. But it's also a move that crystallizes the choice facing voters at the next election in a way that will be hard to obscure. So there you have it. Keir Starmer is going to COP30, despite the advice of nearly everyone around him, despite the political risks, despite the timing. It's a decision that reveals as much about Labour's internal dynamics as it does about the state of climate politics in Britain. And if you want to stay ahead of these stories, if you want analysis that goes beyond the surface-level reporting, then make sure you subscribe to British Newsblog. Hit that button now, because the political drama is only going to intensify from here, and you won't want to miss a single twist. This is your channel for serious political analysis with just enough edge to keep it interesting. Stay informed, stay critical, and I'll see you in the next one.